What if I told you there's a country where Roman cities sleep under African skies, where whitewashed neighborhoods fall toward a blue Mediterranean, and where an ocean of sand still hides stories no one has fully explained? A country so vast, so ancient, and so strangely overlooked that once you start learning about it, it becomes almost impossible to forget. Welcome to Algeria. There are places in the world that are famous because they are easy to understand. One landmark, one image, one simple story. Algeria is not one of those places. Algeria is larger, deeper, and harder to summarize. It doesn't fit into one postcard or one cliché. It is a country of coastlines and canyons, old medinas and Roman ruins, mountain villages and desert silence, French facades and Ottoman echoes, Amazigh identity and Arab influence, revolution, resilience, memory, and mystery. It is the largest country in Africa, and yet for so many people, it remains one of the least understood. That is part of its power. Because Algeria doesn't reveal itself all at once. It pulls you in slowly, first with beauty, then with history, then with the strange feeling that beneath everything you can see, there is still so much more you cannot. And maybe that is the best way to begin this journey. Not with a map, not with statistics, but with a feeling. The feeling of standing at the edge of a country that seems to contain several worlds at once. To understand Algeria, you have to begin in Algiers. The capital does not greet you like a city trying to impress tourists. It does something more interesting than that. It creates atmosphere. The first thing that strikes you is the light. The second is the white. Buildings cascade down hills toward the Mediterranean in soft shades of ivory and cream. Balconies catch the sea breeze, and the city rises and falls in layers, almost like it was painted instead of built. There is something undeniably cinematic about Algiers. You can see why it has fascinated artists, writers, and filmmakers for generations. But what makes Algiers unforgettable is not only how it looks, it's how it feels. Because beneath the sunlight and sea views, this is a city built from centuries of collision. Phoenicians passed through here. Romans shaped parts of the region. Arab dynasties transformed its culture. Ottoman rulers left their mark. The French remade much of its urban identity. And then came one of the most painful and defining struggles in modern North African history, Algeria's fight for independence. All of that still lives in the city. And nowhere is it felt more deeply than in the Kasbah. The Kasbah is not the kind of place you simply see. It's the kind of place you enter and slowly get absorbed by. Narrow alleyways fold into staircases, staircases lead into hidden corners, walls rise close beside you, and old doors seem to guard stories they are not ready to share. It is beautiful, but not in a polished or overly curated way. Its beauty comes from age, texture, and memory. This is the old heart of Algiers, and walking through it feels like stepping inside the layered memory of the city itself. You can almost hear the life that has moved through these lanes for generations. Merchants, families, revolutionaries, neighbors leaning over balconies, children running down stone steps. The Kasbah is intimate and atmospheric, but it is also heavy with history. During Algeria's War of Independence, it became a powerful symbol of resistance. This was not only a historic quarter. It was part of the living geography of struggle, courage, and survival. That is one of the first things Algeria teaches you. Beauty and pain are often side by side here. Grandeur and grief, elegance and endurance. Step out from the Kasbah, and Algiers changes shape. The streets open wider. You begin to see the legacy of colonial architecture, sea-facing avenues, cafes, arcades, and neighborhoods that feel almost European until a turn of the head brings you back into something unmistakably North African. It is this constant shifting of identity that makes the city so fascinating. Algiers is not one visual language. It is several at once. And then, above the city, there is the Martyrs' Memorial. You cannot miss it. It rises with force and symbolism, a monumental reminder that modern Algeria was born through sacrifice. This is not just a structure. It is an emotional landmark. It dominates the skyline not simply because it is tall, but because it represents something enormous in the Algerian imagination. Freedom paid for in blood, memory carved into concrete, and a national identity built from resistance. Spend enough time in Algiers, and you start to understand that the city is constantly speaking in symbols. One of the most surprising of those symbols is Notre Dame d'Afrique, perched above the sea. There is something almost dreamlike about it. A basilica overlooking North Africa, facing the Mediterranean, watching over a city where so many histories overlap. It tells you something important about Algeria without saying a word. This is a place of crossings, of layered faiths, layered empires, layered identities, layered memories. And perhaps that is why Algiers is so hard to shake once you've imagined it clearly. It doesn't feel flat. It feels deep, like a city with hidden rooms beneath the visible one. But as compelling as the capital is, Algeria does not stay contained there. Once you leave Algiers, the country begins to open in directions that feel almost unbelievable. Because Algeria is one of those rare places where you can keep changing landscapes so dramatically that it feels as if you've crossed several countries without ever leaving one. Take Timgad. At first, it almost doesn't make sense. You travel through North Africa, and then suddenly you are standing in the remains of what feels like an ancient Roman city laid out with astonishing order and clarity. Streets, columns, arches, stone pathways that still seem to remember footsteps. Timgad is not just a ruin. It is a reminder that Algeria contains chapters of world history many people never think to place there. You walk through it and feel the weird stillness that only old civilizations can produce. That unsettling and beautiful sensation of standing in a place once full of voices, plans, arguments, prayers, trade, ambition, laughter, routine, and now, silence. That silence says a lot. Because ruins do not only tell you what a civilization built, they tell you that even the most confident empires eventually become fragments. And Algeria is full of those fragments. Then there is Tapaza, where history and landscape come together in a way that feels almost unfairly beautiful. Ancient ruins beside the Mediterranean carry a completely different emotional energy than ruins inland. Here, stone meets sea. Wind moves through old remains while waves continue their endless work nearby. There is something almost poetic about the place. Something that quietly reminds you how temporary human power really is. Cities rise, empires spread, ports flourish, and then, over enough time, the sea simply keeps breathing beside what is left. The farther you go, the stranger and more dramatic Algeria becomes. Then comes Constantine. And Constantine does not merely impress you. It destabilizes your sense of what a city should look like. Perched above deep gorges and connected by dramatic bridges, Constantine feels less like a city placed on the earth and more like one suspended above it. There's an almost impossible quality to it. You stand there and wonder how this became a place where people live ordinary lives, crossing bridges, going to work, carrying groceries, meeting friends, while surrounded by a landscape so dramatic it feels designed for myth. Cities like this do something to the imagination. They make everyday life look legendary. And then, like Algeria refusing to stay in one mood for too long, there is Oran. If Constantine is breathtaking and severe, Oran feels alive, musical, and charged with movement. It is a coastal city with attitude, rhythm, and soul. Here the atmosphere shifts again. The sea is still present, but so is something more urban, more social, more expressive. Oran has long been associated with music, especially Rai, and you can almost feel that pulse in the idea of the city itself. There's energy in Oran, a looseness. A sense that culture here is not just inherited but performed, sung, argued, lived out loud. And yet, for all these cities and ruins and coastlines, there is still one place in Algeria that seems to exist above all others in the imagination. The Sahara. Not the Sahara as a simple travel image, not a few pretty dunes and a sunset. The real Sahara, the Algeria-sized Sahara, the one that changes your sense of scale, time, and silence. Because in Algeria, the desert is not just part of the country. It is the country's deepest mystery. And perhaps nowhere captures that mystery better than Tassili Enager. This place feels almost unreal even when you know it exists. Vast plateaus, strange rock formations, stone forests, canyons, cliffs, and landscapes so surreal they look closer to another planet than to anything most people associate with Earth. It is one of those places that forces you to stop describing and simply stare. But what makes Tassili Enager extraordinary is not only its geology, it is its memory. Because hidden among these rock formations are ancient paintings and engravings, cave art that opens a doorway into a Sahara that once looked nothing like the one we know today. This is where Algeria becomes truly mind-bending. Because the desert was not always desert. Long before endless dryness and dunes, parts of the Sahara were greener, wetter, and alive with animals and human communities. The art in Tassili Enager preserves glimpses of that forgotten world. Figures, scenes, creatures, movement, life where now there is mostly silence. That is not just fascinating, it is haunting. To stand in one of the driest, most imposing landscapes on Earth and realize that it once held a completely different reality creates a strange emotional effect. It makes the desert feel less empty and more layered, less dead and more buried. It reminds you that landscapes have memory too. And in Algeria, memory is everywhere. You feel it in the architecture of Algiers, in the ruins of Timgad, in the cliffs of Constantine, in the sea wind of Tapaza, and most of all, in the desert. But there is another way to understand a country beyond what it looks like. You have to taste it. Because if geography tells you where a people live, food tells you how they live. And in Algeria, food tells a story of family, hospitality, region, memory, and identity. If there is one dish that stands at the center of that story, it is couscous. Now, people all over the world know the word couscous, but knowing the word is not the same as understanding what it means in a home, on a family table, in a celebration, or during an ordinary meal that becomes memorable because of who you shared it with. In Algeria, couscous is not a trend, not an exotic idea, not a side dish. It is tradition. It is ritual. It is comfort. It is one of those foods that carries more than flavor. Picture steam rising from a large serving dish. Tiny grains soft and delicate, vegetables rich with broth, meat cooked until tender, spices woven into the whole thing in a way that feels warming rather than overwhelming. The beauty of couscous is not only in its taste, but in how it gathers people. It feels communal. It feels generous. It feels like something made to be shared. And that idea, food as hospitality, matters deeply in Algeria. Because hospitality here is not just politeness, it is part of the emotional structure of life. Guests are welcomed seriously. Meals are offered with warmth and pride. The table becomes more than a place to eat. It becomes a place to show care, respect, and belonging. That spirit lives in chorba too, a comforting soup that feels like one of those dishes capable of calming an entire day. Rich, fragrant, often deeply associated with home and Ramadan, chorba is the kind of food that tells you instantly that cuisine is not always about spectacle. Sometimes it is about reassurance, about warmth, about familiarity, about that first spoonful that feels like it knows exactly what you needed. Then there is richta, delicate and elegant in its own way. Fine noodles, aromatic broth, often chicken, often served with the kind of care that turns a meal into an experience. It has a softness to it, but also a quiet richness that lingers. Some foods impress you immediately, others stay with you later. Richta feels like the second kind. And then, in a completely different register, comes majauba. Simple on the surface, unforgettable in practice. Thin dough, folded around a savory filling, often tomatoes, onions, peppers, and spice, cooked in a way that turns humble ingredients into something deeply satisfying. This is the kind of food that reminds you that national identity is not built only in grand palaces or historical monuments. It is also built in kitchens, street stalls, and family recipes passed hand to hand. The deeper you go into Algerian food, the more clearly you can taste its history. Amazigh roots, Arab influence, Ottoman echoes, Mediterranean sensibility, regional variety. A country this large could never have only one culinary voice, and it doesn't. What ties it together is not uniformity but emotional texture. Meals feel lived in, human, shared, grounded. There are pastries sweetened with honey and perfumed with orange blossom. There are dishes built slowly, with patience and instinct rather than speed. There are flavors that feel coastal in one region, mountain-born in another, desert-adapted somewhere else. Algeria does not feed you with one single taste. It feeds you with layers. And maybe that is why food matters so much in understanding a place like this. Because Algeria is a country of layers in everything. Language, architecture, music, identity, memory, and yes, food. But as rich and beautiful as all of that is, Algeria never stays only in the realm of the visible and the tangible. Because eventually, if you spend enough time thinking about this country, you run into its shadows. Its unanswered questions. Its legends. Its atmospheres. Its strange silences. And this is where Algeria becomes truly magnetic. Because Algeria is not only beautiful, it is mysterious. The first and greatest mystery is the Sahara itself. People often describe deserts as empty, but that word has always felt wrong. The Sahara is not empty. It is too overwhelming to be empty. It is vast, yes. Quiet, yes, but it is full of presence, full of mood, full of hidden histories. It swallows roads, villages, pathways, caravans, and memory itself. Entire lives have crossed it. Entire stories have disappeared into it. The desert does not merely sit there as scenery. It acts on history. It erases, preserves, hides, and transforms. There is something deeply unsettling about a landscape large enough to make human certainty feel ridiculous. And in Algeria, that feeling is especially powerful. Because the desert here is not a decorative edge to the country, it is a dominating force. It shapes imagination. It shapes mythology. It shapes fear and fascination at the same time. Think about the ancient rock art again, in Tassili and Ager. What does it mean to find proof of another world inside the desert? To discover images of a greener Sahara, of human and animal life in a place that now seems almost inhospitable on a massive scale. It is as if the land itself is holding evidence that reality can change far more dramatically than we tend to believe. That alone is enough to make the Sahara feel uncanny. But then there are the stories. Whispered stories. Desert stories. Stories of strange lights, hidden places, forgotten routes, ruins half swallowed by sand, and landscapes so remote they still feel outside the reach of ordinary explanation. Some of these are legends. Some are fragments of oral history. Some are probably exaggerations. But that is not the point. The point is that Algeria still feels like a country where myth has room to breathe. And that is increasingly rare. So much of the modern world has been flattened into overexposure. Every corner photographed, every secret turned into content, every mystery reduced into a travel reel. Algeria still resists that flattening. It still feels like a place where not every story has been exhausted. Even the historical sites carry that atmosphere. Walk among old ruins in North Africa, and you feel something strange. These were once places of certainty. Places where people believed in permanence. Roads were built, temples rose, markets functioned. Families lived ordinary lives with no idea that centuries later strangers would stand there imagining them through fragments. That gap between lived life and archaeological silence creates a very specific kind of mystery, not supernatural, but existential. Who were they really? What did this place sound like? What was lost that stone cannot tell us? How much of history disappears simply because no one was left to speak it? In Algeria, those questions come easily. Because the country constantly places you near remnants, near traces, near signs that great things happened here, and that much of what happened here is still not fully known outside the people who inherited its memory. That is especially true when you think about Amazigh identity. One of the deepest roots of Algeria lies in its Amazigh heritage, a cultural foundation older than many of the powers that later passed through the region. And yet, as with so many indigenous and ancestral identities around the world, there are layers of suppression, resilience, rediscovery, and pride woven into that story. Algeria is not only a place where history happened. It is also a place where identity survived. That matters, because survival creates a different kind of atmosphere than simple continuity. It creates intensity, meaning, emotional gravity. The same is true of Algeria's independence history. There are countries where modern independence feels distant, almost abstract, folded neatly into textbooks. In Algeria, it still feels close. It still feels emotionally charged. The memory of struggle is not tucked away. It remains present in monuments, in families, in cultural consciousness, in the emotional architecture of the nation itself. To understand Algeria without understanding this would be to miss something central. This is a country shaped not only by what it inherited, but by what it fought to reclaim. And perhaps that is why Algeria feels so powerful even in silence. Because silence here is not emptiness. It is compression. Compression of history. Compression of memory. Compression of all the things still waiting beneath the surface. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. Why is Algeria still so underrated? How can a country with Mediterranean beauty, Roman grandeur, dramatic cities, extraordinary food, ancient identity, and one of the most mysterious desert landscapes on Earth still remain so absent from many people's imagination? Maybe because Algeria has never made itself easy. Maybe because it requires patience. Maybe because it doesn't hand over all its beauty in one glance. Maybe because it still demands curiosity, and curiosity has become rarer than convenience. But maybe that is exactly why it matters. Because Algeria does not feel manufactured for attention. It feels real. It feels layered. It feels earned. It feels like the kind of place you don't just consume and move on from. It lingers. It rearranges something in your imagination. It gives you images that do not leave quickly. A staircase disappearing into the Casa. The Mediterranean flashing beneath white walls in Algiers. A bridge hanging over Constantine's Gorge. Roman stone glowing under North African sunlight. Steam rising from couscous at a family table. The desert stretching so far it feels like the edge of thought. Ancient paintings on rock telling you the world was once completely different here. And that feeling, impossible to fully name, that somewhere beyond the next dune, the next alleyway, the next ruin, another story is still waiting. That may be the truest thing about Algeria. It always feels like there is another story waiting. Another layer. Another silence. Another secret. Another beauty you were not expecting. And perhaps that is why this country can feel so strangely emotional, even if you've never been there. Because Algeria speaks to something very old in the human imagination. The love of hidden places. The fascination with civilizations lost and remembered. The pull of landscapes that seem to hold more than they show. The need to believe that there are still corners of the world where mystery has not been fully replaced by explanation. Algeria is one of those corners. It is not one thing. It is sea and stone. It is memory and resistance. It is hospitality and resilience. It is ancient and alive. It is city noise and desert silence. It is beauty with weight behind it. And maybe that is what makes it unforgettable. Not that it dazzles you all at once, but that it stays with you in pieces. In moods. In textures. In images. Until one day, you realize you are still thinking about it. Still imagining the Casa. Still hearing the wind over the Sahara. Still seeing Roman arches under an African sky. Still wondering what else is buried beneath the sand, beneath the silence, beneath the history we think we already know. And that is when you understand that Algeria is not just a destination on a map. It is an experience of depth. A place that reminds you the world is still bigger, older, stranger, and more beautiful than the internet often makes it feel. So if Algeria was never on your radar before, maybe it should be now. Not because it is trendy. Not because it is easy. Not because everyone is talking about it. But because they are. And maybe Some of the most extraordinary places on Earth are still the ones the world has not fully learned how to see. Algeria is one of them. And once you see even a glimpse of it, it becomes very hard to look away.